Now, this next session is one that I am super excited about, and I'm going to invite this really great group of panelists up to the stage. So if you give them a warm round of applause, and then I'll introduce them all. Come on. All right, welcome everyone. So good to see you. This session is about climate competitiveness for net zero impact, explored through the Exponential Framework. And we're going to unpack all of that for you. Now, the concept, the thing that we're trying to solve in this session is that the race to net zero is in the middle of this very decisive decade. Businesses have got mounting pressure to deliver climate action, but mounting pressure to deliver climate action that is ambitious but also strategically advantageous. And while we've had the fantastic corporate action towards climate action, it has relied quite heavily on, kind of target setting and reporting, operational net zero, if you like. But sometimes what this overlooks is some of the systemic changes or the breakthrough actions that are needed to accelerate us towards, 1.5 degree future. So for that reason, the Exponential Framework is going to update it. We're going to hear more about that in a moment from Johan. But we've been working on that together with Otta Net Zero and Futera. It's been a really great project, so we can't wait to bring you a little bit more of that. I am going to introduce, in fact, I'll introduce all of you and then bring you in one-on-one. We have in the panel here, we've got Johan Falk there in the middle, co-founder and CEO of Exponential Roadmap Initiative. We have, at the end here, Kaja Axelsson, Net Zero Policy Fellow, University of Oxford. Next to Johan here, we've got Emma Stewart, Sustainability Officer at Netflix. To my left here, Caroline Reed, Senior Sustainability Director of Oatly. We've got Sarah Lindstrand next to Kaja, Director of Sustainability at AFRI. And then here we have Eva Carlson, Chief Creative Officer of Houdini Sportswear. Let's give her another round of applause. So, Johan, I'm going to go straight to you. So, for those, obviously, everyone knows what the Exponential Framework is, but for those who would like a little refresher, can you introduce us to it and tell us why it's being redeveloped at the moment?
Yeah, why do we need an Exponential Framework? A lot of focus so far in the existing frameworks has been on setting targets and reporting. We think it's so incredibly important that companies put focus on delivering business results and at the same time reducing emissions and how they can contribute to global net zero, which means taking a holistic perspective. We have decided to add a fifth pillar to this framework, and the framework isn't a new invention. We implemented it like 4 or 5 years ago in our business playbook, and we worked with a high number of companies representing $1 trillion in revenue to refine the framework. But now we decided also to introduce a pillar which is about mobilizing finance investments, because that is also so incredibly important to drive the transformation of the supply chain in particular, and the transformation of industries. So that's basically the starting point.
Great. So, Kaja, I'm going to bring you in because you've been working with Johan to work on this new iteration. Where do you see the greatest need for this new framework? What gap does it help to fill? How should corporates think about using it? Just fill us in a little bit on that.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to address that we, as a system, as an ecosystem, have framework itis. And so, like, I'm talking to the most skeptical in the room who are like, oh my God, not another reporting framework, right? And this is exactly not what this is. And I want to be very clear about that. The reason that we, as a community behind this framework, which I want to mention, it's not just the people on stage, right? There are hundreds and hundreds of people who have worked from businesses, from civil society, from standards, from scientists who have worked on iterating this framework, fine-tuning it over the years. And I'm so excited about the kind of last 3 pillars of this framework because those have been the most neglected aspects of our ecosystem. We have been, rightly following the mitigation hierarchy, thinking about how we can cut operational emissions, thinking about how we can decarbonize and engage supply chains, but we have really missed a trick in terms of systemic impact. And I think I'll quote the great Solitaire Townsend and say, we're fucked. And so we can't just have a piecemeal theory of change where everybody does their little part. We need to invest in breakthroughs. So that requires us to build and scale solutions. It requires us to mobilize finance at speed and scale, and it requires us to shape policy and public narratives to kind of stop acknowledging that we basically laid over this backlash era and failed to fight back. And I think that it's partly because our governance has not enabled and rewarded businesses for doing that systemic work. And so what we can do is our part by changing the standards, by changing the system, and by offering frameworks that reward systemic action. And that's what we're doing with this framework. But I want to say that it's also something that I'm working on across Science Based Targets Initiative, across the International Standard Organization, redefining net zero so that it is equal parts the theory of change of individual engagement and systemic powerful action, acknowledging that companies are truly a part of a socio-technical system and not operating on their own.
Yeah. We had a session earlier on fashion solutions, and it reminded me, 20 years ago when I was first starting out in sustainability, I used to get a little frustrated with we need systems change, because I felt it was a delaying tactic from individual action or organisational action. And I note how far we've come, that actually frameworks like this help to lay out what you can do as an organisation in order to do systems change. Those links have become much clearer, I feel, over the years. And Emma, with that, I'd love to turn to you and say, from a corporate perspective, why is this important? Why do you see the need for frameworks such as this? Framework-itis noted.
Well, I guess you could blame me for some of the framework-itis, because back in 2008, when I was at Autodesk, which is the leading design software company in the world, and we were planning to set our climate targets, I looked out at what was considered best practice at the time, and I realized that most companies were setting their climate targets on the basis of either what their marketing team told them would look good in a press release or what they had already budgeted for in their capital projects budget. And that, to me, felt really kind of disingenuous. And so I said, well, why don't we start with a close reading of the IPCC assessment report, and then let's try and transpose that onto our company. And my team looked at me like I was insane. And about a year later, and probably a master's degree worth of analysis, we produced what became the first science-based target, at least that was globally applicable, inspired by the work of BT that had done something similar, but with private information. So it wasn't replicable, which is kind of the first principle in the sciences. And then we donated it into the Commons, and that became the Science-Based Targets Initiative. And so looking back, I realized kind of in the arc of my career, that might have unintentionally led to a fascination. One might say we're all transfixed with the precision of our operational climate targets. I mean, we're talking 3 degrees of a decimal point in terms of the accounting fights that we're having, when in fact the trajectories in terms of product revolution, in terms of technological R&D, in terms of the policy battles that are playing out all over the world, in terms of the coalitions that need to be built in order to move us all further, faster, all of that went unrewarded and unmeasured. And I think it's partially because it was hard to measure. And I think it's partially because the folks who really specialized in this came more from accounting and operational realms. And so the policy or coalition building or R&D worlds were more foreign to them. But if you went home to your parents, let's say, and you said, here's my report card. I got a C minus, they would probably look at you askance and slightly disappointed. I know my parents would. And if you then said, but it's okay, because I did really well in every other aspect of being a student. I was a really good citizen of the classroom, I was good to my peers, I showed up at library, I volunteered, I advocated for my class. They would say, prove it. You don't get rewarded for that. You got a C minus. That's how companies feel right now. We are getting penalized or rewarded for one or two pillars of what should have always been a 5-pillar framework.
Yeah, I love that. I love that analogy. All right, so this is why it's needed. And Johan, will you now walk us through a little bit about the new update and what it looks like?
Yeah, just to explain the framework really, really fast, the 5 pillars, what it basically is. Well, the first one is about cutting your own operational emissions. Well, that could be your, could be related to your vehicles, your buildings, and so on. And referring to scope 1 and 2, normally a small part of most companies' operation. The second pillar is about cutting emissions in your supply chain. That's, of course, supplier engagement. But it's also renewable energy in your supply chain. It's materials, it's transportation. It could also be investment in carbon removals. Most focus has been on pillar 1 and 2 so far, as Emma said. Now, the third pillar is absolutely central because it's about scaling up solutions which we can qualify as climate solutions, and also about transforming your portfolio. Very much the up curves. The first 1 and 2 is the down curves, the other are the up curves. So that is so essential also to be aligned with the future as a company, the third pillar. But what about 4 and 5? Well, in order to break the boundaries in your value chain, for example, it might make sense to actually invest in your value chain, invest in new technologies, and in protecting nature in carbon removals as a complement to your other strategies. So that's the fourth pillar. And finally, we know that policy is a blocker, and companies need to engage both in convincing their trade associations to actually support climate action, but also stronger climate policies. So that's a fifth pillar. So we say that the company which has a 1.5 aligned strategy and should prosper in the future should have a strategy across the 5 pillars. That is the thinking. And as part of this project that we're talking about, we have developed guidelines where we see specifically that there are missing guidelines connected with these action blocks because companies need strong, sharp guidelines in order to drive climate action. So we are purposely developing guidelines which are forward-looking to the standards. So it doesn't deviate from the standards, but we need to also move faster than the standards. And that is the reason for developing guidelines in these particular gaps.
Great.
Yes.
Okay. Now, we're shortly going to turn to all the businesses on the panel, back to Emma and then on to the businesses to see how this is getting applied. But before we go there, I love that we're going to keep this analogy of the report card. Kaya, bring this to life to us for a bit. Where are you seeing some A+ exponential leadership examples?
Yeah. So I had the privilege of interviewing 35 chief sustainability officers over the last year. I interviewed a bunch of them, including many of the business leaders that work with ERI in 2021, and I had such different takes. In 2021, everyone was talking about broad tent mobilization, about how we can bring a whole movement along through supply chain engagement. They were just setting up their governance around their new net zero targets, and there was a real frenzy. People were like, I don't know, I just threw my CEO up on stage and then he said 1.5 and now we're off to the races. And that was such a moment for us all who felt that we were finally knocking on an open door. But what I heard, I was bracing myself when I did my second round of interviews. We're in a difficult political moment, and I heard such inspiring stories that made me much more excited than the first phase. which was not what I was expecting at all. And the reason that they were more exciting is that people who are passionate about regenerative farming or grid modernization or working in places and parts of the world that no one ever talks about in terms of climate action, we're talking about how they made the business case for climate solutions. We are in Solutions House, after all. So examples included systemic levers, companies going to APAC regions to engage with policymakers if they couldn't buy the renewables that they wanted in the moment, and then figure out how they could do public-private blended finance to completely change the grid system, not only so that their company could have servers that operate on green energy in that region, but also so that that region could leapfrog in terms of its development. I mean, that's the kind of action that is like systemic, that's programmatic, that makes you think like, actually, Trump can't reverse that, right? That energy is online, it has the financing it needs, and it's in a region that has a different political context. Another beautiful example, I talked to a company who felt that they were able to make the business case for the climate action that they wanted in terms of, for another example, getting kind of people online. They were doing all of the sort of climate solutions work because they could get new customers. If they got people clean energy and got people online, then they could get new customers. So it was deep, it was ingrained, it was embedded, and many of them had taken 4+ years to get the business case ready and to make it. But it's hard to reverse. And so when I think about that work and I think about how the standards could better reward it, going back to that original question of like what's been missing from the landscape, we've done an amazing job of writing standards that help us track our emissions. But what we've forgotten largely is what we would consider to be tracked through project-based accounting, things where you have to measure a baseline against something that could have or would have gone differently. That's very difficult to track impact, and it doesn't fit into a physical inventory, which is supposed to be a perfect kind of true value of your emissions, your liability. So moving into experimentation and impact with the final pillars allows us more opportunity for humble experimentation, humble hope, because you don't have to have everything perfect, but you do have to try.
You do have to try, and it does need codifying if the whole of the market is going to adopt it as well.
And we can still compare effort.
Yeah. I love it. If you hadn't realised how exciting standards could be, I introduce you to Kaya, who really has changed my mindset on these things, I have to say.
We have T-shirts that say, make standards sexy again.
We need to get those. All right, Emma, back to you. Because what I would just love to hear is, so Kaya, thank you, because you set the stage with those perspectives on exponential leadership and what that A+ looks like. But Emma, again, you've told us a little bit about why it's needed from a company perspective, but what are you finding that's interesting at Netflix in terms of this approach, and is it unlocking competitive advantage for you as well?
So as Johan will attest to, I hadn't learned of the exponential roadmap when we built the Netflix sustainability strategy. And it was a wonderful moment of serendipity when I realized that our program was actually aligned to the 4 pillars. And now with the 5th, which I think is more about nuancing the original 4 than any major shift, it's just kind of further vindication that we're heading in the right direction. So in terms of the first one, we have publicly committed to have our emissions across, I really find that word difficult to say, have, with a V, our emissions across all 3 scopes by 2030, which is looking very soon. And then in addition, to match all remaining emissions in their totality every year, starting back in 2022. So that's how we think about pillars 1 and 2. And that entails looking very closely at, of course, our enterprise emissions and our streaming digital delivery system, as well as the making of film and television, which it turns out has been done largely the same way for decades. And it turns out that no one likes many of the technologies that the industry has used, like diesel generators, where it's noisy, full of fumes, can't really hear yourself think, they break all the time. And so as we introduce these cleaner options, like clean mobile power in the form of batteries or fuel cells or electric vehicles, it does take some getting used to. I won't lie. The people factor here is real. Just because the technology is inherently better doesn't mean that people adopt it. So that's the work that we still have ahead of us to scale that up. In terms of pillar 3 around solutions, I don't know how you all think about it, but we understand from our consumers that reflecting a changing world in story is really important to them. And so we want to tell wildly entertaining stories. Our mission is to entertain the world, and our service is available in 190 countries, so we have to do that with real cultural sensitivity. And when we look at stats around our sustainability stories in film and television, they reinforce what consumers are telling us, which is these are popular. So over 80% of Netflix members have watched our sustainability stories collection. Okay, that's 80% of 300 million households. Wow. That's a lot of eyeballs. So I don't know if we are a sustainability solutions provider. I have had some investors ask me, can you prove that to me? Still working on that. The fourth one around finance, we, as part of that matching target that I described to you, plow a lot of money and diligence time into understanding where those matched emissions can really turn into very real-time, very high-quality emissions reductions or removals on the ground in countries where it matters the most. So we have carbon credit projects in the natural world as well as the super pollutant destruction world in 6 different countries, and millions upon millions of tons. And what that means is we spend a lot of time in coalition with other buyers trying to ensure that the market can raise to the level of demand that we're seeing with integrity. And then lastly, in policy, we work so closely with our global affairs team to understand what are the risks to the company of, first of all, not meeting our climate targets, but also regulatory risks from either mis or disinformation around energy topics or climate topics. And so that level of education for policymakers and for our trade associations is really well worth the exercise.
Thank you. And I love how you've picked through each of those and integrated the business perspective from that. So the policy work in order to match risk and opportunity. So thank you for that, Emma. Caroline, I'm going to turn to you because I think you've just updated your climate deep dive, your climate strategy.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that, your work at Oatly, and how it's been inspired by users, this 5 pillars, this approach and looking at things has helped.
Definitely. So 5 minutes to update you on all the work we did on updating our climate strategy. So before actually jumping in a little bit to how we've updated our climate strategy and how it aligns with the 5-pillar framework, it's quite helpful to have a little bit context about who Oatly is before we updated our climate strategy. So just very briefly, Oatly is a company built on the idea of change, with a mission to make it easy for people to eat better, live healthier lives without recklessly taxing the planet's resources. And we know that, I'm going to also use a solitaire swear word, we know that the food system is fucked, right? So we've got work to do. So we see our products as a mechanism of change. And why do I say that? This graph demonstrates or shows, and you can see it quite easily. Basically, it's just showing the key markets where Oatly operates, and you can see that across the board, Oatly is significantly less climate impactful than the average cow's milk in the different markets, right? So we can see that we have a significantly less impact. And what that means is last year, then we did work with the Exponential Roadmap Initiative and the Climate Solutions Framework, and stay for the next panel, you'll find out more, where we qualified both our products as climate solutions products and qualified our company as a climate solutions company in the here and now. And then in addition, it's not enough just to have climate solutions products. We really want to raise awareness in society about the impact of the food system. So Oatly is a company that doesn't shy away from being a little bit provocative, but we use our voice and a brand to really drive awareness around the impact of food and the food and drinks that we consume. And even more broadly, we want to really drive climate action in the global sense. So we'll even do campaigns like this one in Europe, which was about vote for the planet, use your voice when it came to the EU elections. So that's kind of who Oatly is. And then we were like, we need to update our climate strategy. So where do we start when it comes to the 5-pillar framework? Well, unlike probably a lot of companies, we didn't start with the kind of pillar 1 and 2 in terms of reducing our GHG footprint. We actually started bang in the middle with how do we build and scale solutions then as a climate solutions company with climate solutions products. And then after that, as I said, our brand, our voice, we like to drive narrative. How do we then use that? So I'm going to just take us through briefly, based on the time. So we have commitments connected to pillar 3, 4, 5, as well as 1 and 2, because we don't want to be a -C student. But when it comes to pillars 3 to 5, we have a commitment that we're really explicit, that beyond our own value chain, we aspire to influence broader climate reductions in the food system and society, contributing to societal net zero by 2050. So we're already, when it comes to net zero, we're not looking within the walls of our company. We're really looking at our contribution to societal net zero, because we're not going to get to net zero as alone, right, as an individual company. So pillar 3 then. Build and scale solutions. What did we do then? We have climate solutions products today. We're a climate solutions company, but that's not enough. We actually modeled our climate pathway. We actually started saying, okay, if we want to remain having climate solutions products and remain a climate solutions company all the way to 2050, what do we actually need to do? So we modeled out that we actually want to increase the delta of how different our products are compared to the average of the category over time. So reaching actually by 2050, we want to be 90% less impactful than the average of the milk category to really drive that systemic change. But we won't actually drive the change, right? Just by having a product that's much less impactful than cow's milk, for example. Because what we actually need to do is we need to change diets and what we consume and what we produce. And so we're really razor focused on, as a company, on conversion. How do we actually enable and support people to go from meat and dairy heavy diets to much more plant-rich diets? So we focus on conversion, and as a company then, we're really razor sharp focused on making amazing, delicious, nutritious products, because actually we know that you don't choose something because it happens to be a climate solution, even though it sounds amazing. You choose something because it tastes great. So stay later, there's going to be some wonderful Oatly cocktails. But to have systemic change in the food system, we also are really aware that we need to address the narrative and policy out there. And so from Oatly's perspective, we need to challenge outdated norms, we need to break down regulatory barriers, and we need to create fair market conditions for plant-rich diets to succeed. So it's not an Oatly target or aim, it's a systemic issue. And we know that we can't do this, obviously, alone. So we really lean into radical collaborations. What are those unusual collaborations? And how do we stand alongside and empower businesses to policymakers, farmers to consumers, so we can all work towards changing and transforming the food system? And so within this space and within this pillar, there's some actions that we're already doing or we're going to continue to do to drive this. And this is how we demonstrate what we're doing. It's hard to measure it. It's hard to say that this is an A+ action or not. But these are things that Oatly is really committed to, and we're really committed to continuing to do these things. And it's everything from committing to advocating for climate labeling for all food and drink everywhere, to continue to raise the awareness of the impact of food and drinks we have or consume. It's about countering all the crazy misinformation and polarization out there, especially regarding plant-based, plant-rich diets. We are a company founded in science, and we want to use science and elevate science and make it into an interesting story. But basically, we need to counter all the misinformation that's out there to drive the transformation we need to see. We need to advocate for a fair, level playing field. And this is a weird thing. I know it's not a whale, it's a dolphin. It's not a dolphin, it's a whale. I don't know. A colleague of mine was like, that's actually, you picked a dolphin, but that's our creatives inside Oatly. They think they're ironic, I guess. But the point is, we need to have fair taxation. Why are we paying like 20% VAT on a plant-based milk and only 6% on a cow milk, right? We need a fair playing field, level playing field to enable that transformation. And then we do other things like pushing for updated dietary guidelines that are in line with a planetary diet, advocating for sustainable and resilient food systems, regenerative agriculture, all these different things. But we really are going to continue to really lean on using our voice in terms of policy, but also the narrative and enabling and inspiring consumers to drive change and take change. I'm probably at time, but can we sit back and relax? Clearly not. We do want to get an A+ in the pillars 1 to 2. So maybe just to summarize, yes, we have science-aligned targets here. And not to go into the details, but our most material impacts are oats, transportation, and energy. And just to kind of highlight, not surprisingly, we need to have action in pillars 4 and 5 that will enable us to reduce our impact in our pillars 1 and 2. Yeah. So just to highlight that point. So to maybe just end with that, that's how we updated our climate strategy based on the the 5-pillar playbook. When we really encourage others to start to sort of think outside the box, think outside the walls of your company, because we only can together reach societal net zero.
Awesome. I mean, we've still got 2 speakers to go, and as everyone's been dropping F-bombs left and right, I'm just going to say, what a bunch of climate badasses we've got on this panel. Just finding all the different ways to create change. So thank you. That was great. And Eva, can I come to you? Because our climate badasses have been laying out how this works in different sectors. But what about the apparel industry? Can you tell us a little bit how you can apply the 5 pillars there? And I think you've got a similar kind of 5 minutes or so.
Yes. Houdini, it's an outdoor brand based in Sweden, and I guess I should just add some context to the apparel industry. The apparel industry produces 100 billion garments per year, at least, and 60% of those garments are discarded within the first year. It's a wasteful industry, full stop. Oh, and we have been knowing this since the start, so we decided that if we're going to do this, we need to reimagine just about everything about an apparel business. And so we have. And we've had nature as our blueprint for that transformation that we've been working on. And with nature, I'm thinking there's a lot of things about nature. It's this magnificently complex, perfectly working system. Circularity is one. So and that was intuitive to us. We didn't need a framework to decide that we wanted to go from linear to circular. So circular product design is one. Circular use in terms of how do you access products. Can you access products without owning them? If you own them, can we support them with services so that we extend product lifetime? There's a lot of things about circular use that can be explored and supported our customers and users. And then a collaboration and open source. And we believe that if you look at nature again, circularity is about also distributing knowledge. So how can we hook arms with others to learn and accelerate change together? And that means that we also are open source if we have a solution that we think that our peers in the industry should be using as well. So that's circularity, I suppose, as a whole for us. And then we started realizing that we needed more data science, earth system science, to understand how to move further towards circular and regenerative. So we applied the planetary boundaries framework, and realizing that we need to, as a business, we need to be within the framework, or the boundaries of the framework. And that's tricky, and I think that it's worth mentioning here, because that means we have a holistic sense, not only in the 5 pillars, but also in our impact on the planetary scale. It's not only carbon and decarbonization, it's also about biodiversity and understanding our impact on land and ocean and so forth. So this is the scientific ecology framework that we use. And then what about people then? If we are going to have a positive impact on people, not only our customers, not only ourselves, but also everyone in our value chain, that means we have a framework for social aspects, and that's maybe the donut economics framework, business for people. And then last but not least, we also want to build into our system that nature has an intrinsic value. It's not only for us to exploit and use, but rather it has its own value, its own set of creatures out there with their own dreams that we share the planet with. So all this together can, I guess, be translated into this 5-pillar framework. So I just have a few examples of what we do. And of course, the first one, it's not that relevant for us. It's not where we manage to reduce our impact the most or scale positive impact. But the second one, moving from linear to circular, that will mean that we will push our impact, negative impact, towards the safe operating space quite effectively. But I wanted to share something about longevity, because that's something that the apparel industry in general don't look into that much. So a product is used on average in the Western world 10 times. In the global average is a little more than 100 times. And you can design a product that it lasts much longer. So how do you do that? And then design products so that they last longer and that people also want to use longer. So we have data from our customers and wonderful users that we can actually scale then the user timeline from 10 times to more than 1,000, meaning more than 10 years of use, several times per week for more activities than they expected to start out with. So there's power in design, just what we have. Investing in transformation, we are not uncompromising in investing only in what makes sense for the future. And then transformation in terms of mindset, that goes not only for our customers and users, but also our corporate culture and our mindset as a company. And our idea then is to, one example at least, is to empower people to live large with less, and that is something that we need to enable as an apparel company. It's not about only maximizing profits, pushing products out there, but rather the opposite. How can we explore ways for people to have a wonderful life, buy our products, and then empower them to have less? That makes more sense.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's what I love about this approach is that it means that sectors that might have been, I mean, a textile and apparel is always we've looked at in terms of those first 2 pillars, and it gives us a different way of looking at the next 3 pillars. But Sarah, if I can come to you and your experience at AFRI, you've been doing work, I think, on pillar 3, but from a professional services perspective, which is a sector that there is a lot of focus on nowadays, but that's been a relatively recent bit of focus. So can you tell us how this is relevant and gives more of a frame to take action for professional services?
Yes, of course, and it feels great to be part of this panel, together with the innovators and pioneers in the panel. So we've been members of the ERI since 2020, and we were eager on this, the framework, the business playbook, as a very concrete way to really showcase that it's not about our own emissions. Primarily, it's about the business strategy and the solutions that we provide to our clients. So we're an engineering consultancy firm. We drive over 100,000 projects per year. We serve 18,000 clients. It's primarily through the projects that we run that we have the biggest impact on the sustainability transition. And then also, of course, the 4th pillar, previous pillar, influencing climate action in society. And I liked what you mentioned on the humble experimentation. So since last year, we've been driving this project together with ERI to try out the professional services matrix. So to map out the projects that we run on an annual basis and understand where does the net sales end up. So looking at the project's alignment, being a climate solutions project or maybe a project that might accelerate climate emissions, to be able to map out where would this project land, and also look at the client's climate performance as well to see where does our portfolio land, where's the weight of the net sales that we have on an annual basis. Could we build a baseline and over time then shift the portfolio towards then something that would be supporting the climate transition. So we're eager to try out the the framework, and we're continuing the work with developing it together with the ERI.
It's so important, I think, that, again, these industries which previously have been a little bit ignored but wield this enormous reach and engagement and influence, have a way to get involved. So thank you for that example. It's something we look at Futera a lot as well. We do a thing called a client disclosure report, which discloses our revenue per industry as a way of giving transparency of the type of assignments that we take on. So welcome the further developments on this, Sarah, because it will be great to see. All right, now we are almost out of time. We've got about 3 minutes left. We have cantered through these updates and the various ways that we can think differently about how to take corporate climate action and how to be rewarded on that. The report card has certainly gone down as an analogy. Everyone's been using that. So, Johan, I know I need to save a couple of minutes for you to talk about next steps, which is kind of now. But I just would turn to the panel and just say, if there's anything, Emma and Kaya, I think perhaps you wanted to come back in on, again, how we might see this being developed in future. So just give a moment to each of you if you wish.
I cede my time to Kai.
Okay.
Wait, thank you, Minister. That would be good. So basically, the standards that use kind of emissions accounting as their primary metric of progress, they have one claim, and typically it's net zero or the interim targets having emissions by 2030. The way that this framework rewards near-term action and effort, like what we heard about on the panel, is through the action blocks that Johan spoke about that underlie a whole lot of other actions. And you would be able to see kind of like a bingo board where companies are leading. So it's just, companies are not monoliths. They have not only better kind of impact potential in certain areas or certain action blocks, but they also have strengths. And we don't want them to be focusing everywhere, spreading, especially right now, thin resources on things that, are possibly a little bit immaterial, even though we do have to make sure that they kind of cover the basics on every pillar. So the idea is that a company would kind of get a minimum level, like a pledging level of commitment. They could get a minimum standard where they meet, say, the Race to Zero minimum criteria. Then they would get a high standard, and we could reward them in the high standard arena for specific areas of action. Like, let's say a company, hasn't yet done a lot on influence because that's not their strong suit, but they have electrified their entire fleet. We should be recognizing that and not just giving them a B-. Similarly, if a company has done incredible policy engagement, they're leading 5 coalitions to get other peers to change the system, then we should be rewarding them for that, even if they've got a blocker on their emissions reductions, likely the thing that they're advocating for. So that's kind of some of the new way that we're thinking about bringing this in as a recognition of leadership that recognizes specific action areas. And it's really complementary to the standards that I work on. Like, I wouldn't be up here if I felt that this was in competition with the science-based targets with the International Standard Organization. It's an enabling strategy tool that will ultimately help you get, when you get audited for those standards, not show up and say, whoops, like we forgot what we're supposed to do. No one told us what actions we should take, and no one rewarded us. So it's an interim step. Hopefully it can bring some excitement and some cheer to companies who need some wins right now, and inspire innovators inside companies, of which we have many here on stage.
Excellent, thank you. And then Johan, over to you.
Yeah, these were really brilliant examples. So impressive. I'm absolutely impressed about what you're doing as companies. And it also, I think, confirms that this framework is very, very solid. It's basically what we need from a company perspective and from a holistic viewpoint. What are we doing next? Well, we're of course updating, our business playbook or exponential business playbook before COP, which basically describes all the action blocks, all the actions. It's obviously, of course, open source for anyone to use everywhere, which is incredibly important. And of course, our assessment model, the climate performance review and recognition model, we're updating that as well, which basically reflects all the 5 pillars. And then together with our companies in ERI and outside ERI and our other organizations we collaborate with, We will work on scaling this, of course, together so that many more companies can actually utilize experiences from all these companies in a much more simplified way, and also applying new type of tools and AI over time. That should be the goal.
Right. So watch this space. All right. Thank you. A warm round of applause for such an amazing set of panelists.